Welcome to Module 7, Managing Your Property Like a Pro. Contracts, communication, consistent net operating income growth. Buying a property is exciting, but the wealth is built in the management phase. This is where you protect your investment, maintain great tenant relationships, and you systematically increase the property's net operating income and ultimately the value, right? That's what drives the value. So, in this module, we're going to cover the importance of detailed legal contracts, such as tenant agreements. We're going to talk about how to build strong professional tenant relationships. And if you're self-managing, you still need to factor in the cost, right, of property management and hiring that out. I think it's really important to understand yourself how professional property management works, because even if you are hiring someone to do that for you, I want to be able to hire them properly and recruit them properly, right? There's a lot of crummy property managers out there that don't really protect your asset and your tenants very well, right? And your tenants, when they're happy, they take care of your property. So very important considerations. I want to talk about why consistent, systematic property improvements and rent increases defines your net operating income, which also defines your market, your value of your property. So for the first part of this module, I want to focus on the power of contracts. Your tenant contract is your first line of defense. It's not just paperwork, it's literally the law, and it defines the framework for your entire business relationship, basically. In real estate, contracts don't just protect you when things go wrong, they really keep things going right. So you got to be detailed and be specific. I refer to my contract all the time for how the whole thing works, right? And if there's ever a question, I just refer to the tenants to the contract as well. A vague lease creates confusion. A detailed lease prevents it. So I won't go into the specifics here because each state in the US and each province in Canada is different, but I will share some of the key clauses that you always want to have covered in your lease agreements. For one is the names of the tenants and the full legal names. It has to be the exact name. You have to get it from their driver's license, right? Not half names or whatever, not nicknames. You need to have email addresses for all the people that are part of the lease agreement. So the actual official tenants, you need their email addresses and their phone numbers written on the lease. And I'll tell you why. One time, to give you an example, I only included the main tenant, the main person I was communicating with. I put his email and his phone number, and I forgot to put, I didn't forget, I just didn't know, and I didn't put the email address of one of the other tenants. There was 3 tenants, two of them I got their email addresses, and the other one I just didn't bother, put in like an addendum form to include their contact info. And I needed to do an eviction, and when I tried to do the eviction, the official way to do it, I wasn't allowed to use an email to send an eviction notice, and I didn't live in the city because I hadn't officially put her email, so they could have countered it if they took it to a tenancy board and said it doesn't qualify as a true eviction notice. So I ended up having to have it served in person, and it was a whole hassle because I just didn't put the email address. So you got to be very clear and follow things by the book. Be very clear. In the United States, I think there's a lot more slack, but in Canada, you really have to be on the book, by the book with how you do your legal side of the business. You want to include the rent amount, exact rent amounts, payment dates, and the method that they can make payment. You want to have a clause for late payment policy, when it applies, what the penalty is. You want to have a clause for maintenance responsibilities for their side, but also what you're going to do in terms of your responsibilities for maintenance, which you want to be doing anyway to protect your asset. So who handles what, timelines, all that kind of stuff. You want to have a clause for use of premise, so exactly specify if it's a residential property, if it's residential only. You want to specify if there's no subleasing, obviously no illegal activity. You want to have notice requirements. There's a clause for that. So how do they terminate the agreement, right? How do they give notice? What's the renewal period? How do they say that they'd like to renew if that's needed, right? Deposit terms, where is it being held? What are the conditions for the refund? Usually the deposit is going to be also kind of connected to your move in, move out checklist. So if you're self-managing, you're going to have a move in, move out checklist, usually accompanied by not professional, but photos of the space that you'll want to sign off with them. So if you're not doing this, or you have someone else managing, they're going to take care of this, the move in, move out checklist, right? It has to be a formal process that gets signed off on, right? And if it's not, when you do the closeout, if there's damage beyond wear and tear, there might be an amount that's taken off of their rental return. So all this stuff, you got to be aware of it. Annual rent increase notice periods. So you want to align that also with your state or your province, because different places, you can't just raise the rents. You need to give proper notice. Some places, like in Canada, some places it's 3 months notice and some places it's 6 months notice. You need to know that, because you can't just go cowboy and do what you want, right? They can easily counter it with the tenancy acts. So you need to look up all of these exact things required for your tenants' lease agreements in different places and follow it to a T. It's very, very important. Pro tip: always have your lawyer or a property manager, maybe you don't need a lawyer, but a property manager, probably ChatGPT, review your lease to ensure that it complies with whatever the landlord-tenant laws are in that state or province. A solid contract sets expectations clearly, and clear expectations prevent conflict. Banks also like to see these for financing purposes because it creates a security, right? If I have a rental property with, let's say I have a rental property that has 5 units, and I have a lease agreements that say 2,000, 2,000, 2,500, and it equals 11,000, I have contracts for the income. Banks want to know that, right? Because that's how they decide on how much you can afford to finance. So yeah, lots of information right there. But now let's get into a little bit of contract law stuff, some of the basics of contract law. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not here to give legal advice, but there are some basic stuff that you're going to want to do your own research, talk to your own lawyer about. Yeah, so I'm going to share just kind of 5 essentials things for a valid contract. I'm not going to go into detail, but I can certainly tell you some of the basics. So one being offer and acceptance. Both parties agree clearly to the same terms. So you've both signed it, right? The next thing is called consideration. This is quite a generic concept, but consideration means that something of value is given in exchange. You can't have a contract where one person's giving value and the other person's giving nothing. There has to be an exchange. That's kind of why you see sometimes people have like $1 on a contract. There has to be some kind of an exchange. In this case, we're providing a space for living in return for money, like dollars. Legal capacity is another important part of contract law. Both or all of the parties involved are legally allowed to enter the agreement, right? So if somebody's underage and they're not allowed to enter an agreement, or they're have maybe psychological impairment that's recorded and you enter into a contract with them, like it might be void, the contract, stuff like that. Intent. Both intend to be legally binding, right? Both people agree that it's a legally binding contract, so it's not casual. You understand the implications. Yeah, and then legality. You have to make sure that whatever you're signing off on, all the terms actually comply with the law. So, you know, if I can't just write a term in saying that I can do a rental increase with 1 month's notice if in that province it's by law it's 6 months notice. I can't just change the term and because you signed off on it, it doesn't make a difference. It would actually void it, right? So if any of these 5 things are often missing, your contract might not hold up in court. And that's really why we want to do everything properly. We want these contracts to truly hold up, right? As investors, we don't need to practice law, but we do need to respect law. And that respect combined with professionalism is what gives you the credibility in your market, and it keeps your tenants accountable. And good formal agreements also sets the tone for a very healthy, strong tenant relationship, which is what I want to talk about next. Tenant relationships. So tenant relationships aren't about being friends, right? You can be very, very friendly, and I usually am. Like my tenants often really like me, and they realize that it's like something that I care about, and I'm trying to buy real estate and take care of the properties. I take really good care of my rental properties. So but I become very friendly, but at the end of the day, I am very formal as well. And because of that, there's a mutual respect and there's clear communication that I follow, which is what I'm trying to teach right now. So what I've learned is that when tenants feel respected, informed, and treated fairly, obviously they take better care of your property and which is your investment, and they stay for longer. If they stay longer, less turnover is more profitable. There's less vacancy. So you can create that experience. That's your job, is to create that experience if you're a property manager. So if you're self-managing, that's your job. If you're hiring a property manager, you're going to pay them significant amount of money, like 6, 7 to 8% of your rent is going to them. This becomes their job, what I'm telling you right now. So number one thing would be being really professional. So start with professionalism, all the way from your ad that you post on Facebook Marketplace or wherever you post your tenant ads, all the way to your first conversation, to your interview process and your screening process, all the way to your decision and to onboard them and like bring them in and sign off on the contracts, and even just like you're going to want to be sending out. I've included actually in the attachments as well a document for applications, having a formal application setting where you can do income checks and stuff like that. It sets the tone, all this stuff, right? Be organized, respectful, and clear. Number two is communicate really proactively, right? So like we talked about the move in and move out inspection. So send move in instructions really early by email or however you're doing it. Complete your move in and move out inspection reports and send them a copy of it. So confirm when rents are received each month. Respond saying, thank you very much, your rent has been received, or have an automated reply for that. Give early notice. If you're doing maintenance, it's great. People love that the property that they live in is getting maintained. But you got to give notice for these maintenance visits or inspections. Number three, handle maintenance really fast. So if a tenant's tap breaks, they're going to message the property manager. And if that's you, respond immediately and be like, and take care of it, right? Like this is what gives the perceived value, which down the line actually is where you get to raise rents from, is because part of it is the service, right? The property manager is about the service of experience. You have to remember, you're getting into the business of housing. You're supplying housings and homes for people to live in. It's a service-based business. Even though the investment in the asset is very, very expensive, at the end of the day, it's still a service experience. The feel of the home, how it's maintained, how their partner, which is the property manager, responds to them in terms of taking care of anything that they need, right? We want to make sure they're really, really happy, our tenants. And when you're proactive on repairs, they're going to take a lot better care of the property themselves because they see that you really are trying to care for it, right? They're not going to let it fall. If you're letting it fall apart, they're going to be like, it's falling apart anyway. The landlord doesn't care. So 24-hour turnaround on all repairs. It shows you care. Don't screw this up. So if you have a property manager, make sure they believe in the same value that I just shared. These are all things I interview when I'm hiring property managers. Number four, you document everything. And I mean everything. Use email or a property management software, or Google Drive is where I store everything. And I have my master Excel file, which you can get a copy in the next course, of my entire management Excel system that I built with all my experience and all that stuff. Verbal promises, they fade, right? That's not a way to keep records. So written records by email. Text message is okay, but still I'd rather do it through email. It's much more easy to track and folder the conversations so you have a full record of everything that was said. Tenant satisfaction, remember, isn't charity. It's asset protection. Happy tenants means fewer turnover, steady income, and stronger financial performance. They literally take care of your property for you and pay all the bills. In the next section, we are going to cover, last section we're going to cover here is about systematic property improvement and rent increases and why this matters so much. So one of the most overlooked yet most powerful aspects of real estate investing is diligent, systematic rent increases, especially in a lot of the provinces in Canada. Your rent roll and your expenses define your net operating income, and the NOI, net operating income, defines your property value, especially as you get into multifamily real estate. So I'm going to give you a quick example of what I mean here. So let's say your property generates $100,000 in annual net operating income. And the net operating income, so that maybe the property is making $150,000 of rent. This would be a multifamily deal. And there's $50,000 of expenses, and then there's $100,000 left over before paying the mortgage, right? So that would be your net operating income. If the cap rate, this is a very specific number, and each market has its own cap rate. Let's say the cap rate is 5%. The way the value on that property works is called NOI divided by cap rate, which is expressed as a percentage. And if you divide those two, you get the value of the property. And especially when you get into multifamily investing, this is what the banks and other investors in the community all recognize as the true value. So if you take $100,000 divided by 5%, you'd get a $2 million property. That's what the value of a property is that has a net operating income of 100,000. So to give you some perspective, if you raise rents and you improve the efficiency of the property, so maybe I do a little bit of a reno, or I fix something up, or I do some painting, and then I do a rent increase. And let's just say I increase the rent by $5,000 a year for this property. This is a multifamily deal. Maybe there's 8 units and I increase the rents by $55 per unit or something like that. And let's just say overall it's $5,000 for the year, which would be $416 a month. The new value of the property would now be $105,000 of net operating income instead of the original $100,000. So by increasing the rent by $416 a month, my net operating income now goes up $5,000. And if you divide that by the cap rate of 5%, the new value of the building has now turned into $2.1 million. So by having a small increase in rent, we increase the value of the building by $100,000, and that's recognized by the banks and other investors. That's power. That is the power of being consistent with your rent increases. And why I'm harping on the consistency part is that in many places in Canada, we have caps on how much we can increase rents per year, especially in British Columbia, which is where I live. So if we skip or miss a year, we lose the value, right? So if I was going to increase my rents $50 a unit and I forget to do it one year, I just lost $100,000 of value because I'm not allowed to make it up the next year. I've missed it. And it's hard to catch up, basically. It's, if you have tenants that like the place, which we want, now it's a problem, right? If they stay in the unit and they don't move out, which I don't want them to move out unless I screw this part up. So it becomes a cap, right? I can only increase my rents so much every year, right? Yeah, you can't just double it. So some of the best practices for rent increases that I have are just, first of all, follow the law. Every province or state has rules on the frequency and notice periods. So for example, 12 months between increase in BC. 12 months is how often you can do it, and you need to give 90-day notice in most places. You got to be systematic. Schedule your reviews annually. So don't skip years. It compounds negatively. Put it into your calendar. So I actually have it literally in my Google Calendar. On a repeating event is when I give notices. And I do want to make sure I'm not over increasing rents. I want it to be at market rent, like the correct market rent. That's really the aim of this. It's not about gouging tenants. It's just making sure you're keeping up with the current market rents, right? And as the property value goes up, that's what also will allow you to refinance in the future, or even get financing in the first place sometimes. Number 3, communicate professionally. Explain the reason for rent increases, right? Write a little notice, say inflation, maintenance cost increases, market adjustments, or maybe you're doing a little bit of a reno. Maybe you're getting them a new kitchen or a new sink, or maybe you're going to put a new toilet in or paint the front door. All these things should kind of go with your rent increase notice. Number 4 is actually pairing the increase with value. So like I said, repaint a common area, add better lighting, include a small renovation that justifies it. Number 5, track everything in your management system and on your master Excel file. Again, that file can be found in the next course. The investors who manage rent increases consistently are the ones whose portfolios double quietly in value. That's the bottom line. All in all, you need to manage the asset like a professional operator. Treat your property like a small business, because that's exactly what it is. Some of the core management systems that you're going to need are including, we've covered a bunch of them, but you're going to need your tenant onboarding checklists, keys, documents, walkthrough photos. You're going to want to have your application form as a little system. I've included one below. You're going to have your monthly rent tracking system, so having a spreadsheet where you can track all the rents that come in. You're going to have a maintenance log where you can track all your updates, vendor costs, like all the renovation stuff you've done or maintenance things. You're going to have annual financial summary where you can track your budgets, and I track everything, right? What's my goal versus my actuals on a monthly basis. Any capital expenditure stuff, like big expenses that you have to plan for, which you're going to have to use your cash flow for. Things like roofs, furnaces, painting, like big things that you need to plan years ahead. You need to be aware of that and make sure you budget for it. And when you operate your little mini rental business with this level of organization, you're going to attract better tenants, and you're going to retain better professionals on your team. and you're ultimately going to command higher valuations from lenders and appraisers. So great property management, it's really not about micromanaging. It's about systems, contracts, and consistency. Be friendly but firm, be compassionate but professional, and above all, be consistent. Because in real estate, the consistency of your system defines the trajectory of your wealth. So to recap, get everything in detail and in writing from all your contracts, all that stuff. Communicate clearly, build strong, respectful tenant relationships, and implement rent increases systematically. So in the next module, we'll talk about scaling up for those of you who are interested in moving from single family to multifamily investing, and how to structure, I'll talk a little bit about structuring partnerships and systems so that you can go from a few doors to entire buildings. I've included some attachments for you, like I said in this video at the bottom, like writing ads for your rentals, how to structure rental application forms. Don't skip that. Move in and move out checklists, rental increase notices, templates, and yeah, you can start building your investments portfolio, kind of your own mini system in Google Drive is where I suggest. We'll see you in the next module.